Starting off this countdown, we have absolving sins with money. Basically, back in the day, the Catholic Church told people that they could absolve their sins and get a ticket to heaven if they just paid them. Like, you were paying the church for forgiveness. Sorry, that's not how these things work. It also got to the point where people were paying for future sins. Not only that, they claimed that for a fee, relatives could get their deceased loved ones out of purgatory. And people fell for this all. Not only that, but poor people thought that they were screwed. They're like, if we sin, it's over. We can't afford to pay to get our sins forgiven. I wouldn't be surprised if the rich went around committing crimes and killing people, then being like, here's some cash, I'm all good now, thanks. In our ninth spot, we have imprisoning Galileo. In 1663, Galileo was like, science is greater than God. He also said that the sun was the center of the universe and claimed that the earth moved around it. I mean, he was onto something there, but just, he was slightly off. Anyways, the church didn't like these claims because it conflicted with the teachings of the church, so they imprisoned him. He was imprisoned in his home for years. I mean, they threatened him with torture, imprisonment, and even being burned at the stake, so let's just say he got off easy compared to those other punishments. It wasn't until 350 years later did the church be like, okay, yes, we agree, Galileo was onto something. Moving on to number 8, we have cutting funding. For years, the church gave thousands of dollars to a non-profit organization, Compañeros, that would help Hispanic immigrants get access to healthcare, among other things. That was until they found out that Compañeros supported a gay and lesbian rights group. So the church cut the funding to this company for their connection to the LGBTQ2S+ community. They're not the only group that the church has done this to though. No, apparently, and I quote, since 2010, 9 groups from across the country have lost financing from the campaign because of conflicts with Catholic principles. Moving on to number 7, we have the gay clergy member. In 2018, a secret Catholic group came forward claiming they had information all about their clergy member, Monsignor Jeffrey Burrell. They claimed that he was using the gay male dating app Grindr and would visit gay bars weekly. Now let me just say, there's nothing wrong with being gay. What's wrong is shaming this poor man and outing him, and the poor man had to resign. Obviously, this is something the Catholic Church doesn't want us to know. Why? Because they say homosexual acts is immoral and contrary to the natural law. They also say homosexual tendencies are objectively disordered. And they also preach celibacy. So having a clergy member that is gay is highly controversial for them, and they tried to hide it. A lot of Catholics were outraged when word got out. Scariest part is how they found out about Jeffrey in the first place. Apparently the group was tracking his movements based on the apps he was using. Pretty terrifying and also very, very wrong. Moving on to number 6, we have Joan of Arc. Turns out that the church wasn't the biggest fan of Joan of Arc. In fact, at one point she was pretty much the Catholic Church's #1 public enemy. Long story short, she believed that God was speaking to her and had told her to start an uprising to get the English out of France. By doing so, she pissed off some high-powered Catholics who wanted her gone. So they decided to put her up for trial. But legit, they had no evidence against her, but they were like, whatever, fake it till you make it, right? So they just accused her of heresy with no evidence cause it was a lie. And on top of that, they denied her counsel, which was against the church's rules. They just hated her and wanted to get rid of her. I think there were like 70+ charges brought up against her. One of them being for wearing men's clothing, in which she was burned at the stake for. In 1431, in front of a crowd of thousands of people, they lit her on fire for wearing male clothing. But it was discovered after her death that she never even did this. Literally, they killed an innocent woman. Why? Because they were probably intimidated by her. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the slaying of women. Pope Innocent VII wasn't innocent at all. In fact, he was terrified of witches. He said that they were real and a huge threat, so he created a huge witch hunt. He dispatched his men to Germany to try witches, and due to the pressure he put on them, countless innocent women were killed after being accused of being witches. All because Pope Innocent was paranoid as hell. Not only that, but in 1487 a book was written all about these witches. It said that this book promoted burning them at the stake stake, and that influenced a number of killings. Plus, the book was just filled with lies, like saying these women would stop cows from producing milk and would ride on broomsticks in the air. It's just truly messed up and spread misinformation and paranoia. In our fourth spot, we have the burning of the dead. Apparently, the church holds grudges because 43 years after John Wycliffe passed away, they had his body dug up and burned. Now, let me explain how it got to this point. So, John saw fault in the Roman Catholic Church and saw how it was corrupt. So he believed that people should worship God and Jesus according to the Bible, not according to the popes and their bishops and priests, because people are corrupt. But the Bible is not. He also believed that people should interpret the Bible for themselves and not how other people tell them to interpret it. Well, the church did not like this at all. So when he passed away, they ordered all his books to be burned. They also ordered for his body to be unburied. And for some reason, it took them years to get this all done. So 43 years later, his body was finally unburied and then torched, and then his ashes were just thrown into the river. In our third spot, we have the misuse of power. Just this year, it was discovered that the French clergy had taken advantage of over 200,000 young individuals since the 1950s. It is absolutely disgusting. The height of this happened between the 1950s to the 1970s. That's when most of the cases were discovered. Then there was a resurgence of cases in the early 1990s. And obviously the Catholic Church doesn't want anyone to know about this. In fact, it's obvious that the church was turning a blind eye to the perpetrators. They were more focused on protecting themselves and their reputation. They did not care for the victims at all. A report said, and I quote, "The Catholic Church's immediate reaction was to protect itself as an institution, and it has shown complete, even cruel indifference to those having suffered abuse." Like I said, it's absolutely disgusting. Moving on to number 2, we have the number of priests. In January of 2002, it was discovered that 234 priests have had allegations of sexual misconduct made against them in the last 50 years. You heard me, 234. That just makes me sick to my stomach. These individuals are using their title and control to take advantage of others. Some of the victims did file lawsuits against a number of dioceses and got multiple $1-million settlements in some cases. But that still does not take away their trauma and their PTSD. Even though the Catholic Church held a worldwide summit to talk about all this, it wasn't that effective, as priests were still caught taking advantage of individuals years later. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Inquisitions. It should not be forgotten that the Catholic Church would routinely arrest and torture Jews, Muslims, along with other individuals of different religions. They literally were like, convert to our beliefs or be executed, it's your choice. They were given a warning. They were told to vacate the area, and the people that stayed were arrested, and then either forced to convert or be executed. Sometimes they even tortured them before execution. They used branding, would hang them from their thumbs or toes, and would break their bones. After that, that's when they were strangled and then burned at the stake.
Starting us off for number 10 is The Nun. So while I was away, I started watching this Netflix docu-series called The Keepers, and the whole story started with a confession. In Baltimore towards the late 60s, a student called Jean Wayner went to a Catholic high school called Archbishop Keogh High School, and the school was run by nuns, the principal was a priest, and one day Jean went into the chapel to confess something. She confessed to her principal that she'd been sexually abused a few years prior, and that was the start of everything going downhill. The priest demanded to know who she was, because obviously confessions are anonymous, and then started rambling on about how it was her fault this had happened to her because she had the devil inside of her, she was a sinner, and whatnot. After that point, Jean herself started getting raped on a daily basis by the priest and by other men he would bring into his office to rape her. It started with Jean, but then it started happening to a huge group of the girls at the school. Now, the youngest nun on the faculty, Kathy Sesnick, was close to all the girls, and she sensed something was off with one of them during an after-school musical session. She persisted a bit with the girl, and the student ended up telling her the priest was doing bad things to her, and Kathy said she would take care of it. Summer holidays soon came, but Kathy never returned to the school. No one would tell the girls what happened to her, but soon enough it got out that Kathy had been abducted. Months later, they found her dead body, and and the original student, Jean, remembered in a repressed memory in her 50s that the priest had taken her to Kathy's body and said, "You did this, never tell anybody what happened to you again." So that one confession resulted in countless girls getting raped and someone getting murdered. I know I basically spoiled the whole premise for you guys, but you guys should really watch the show, it's actually quite good. Coming in at number 9 is incest, because with confessions comes incest, apparently, I don't know. Either way, Redditor Throwaway3708 confessed when he was 15 his parents were going through quite a rough divorce. His dad lived at his friend's house and his mum worked night shifts, so parental presence was at an all-time low. Either way, one night his 19-year-old sister came home drunk from a party and she sat next to him on the couch and was just grabbing his leg, you know, joking about, and then they started fondling each other. Then they started having sex, and then the next day the sister had been so drunk she had zero recollection of what had happened, so the brother said nothing at all. Now I really can't excuse any part of this, but intoxication, okay, she was blackout drunk, but the brother was 100% sober, so what is that? Can we just talk about that for a second? Either way, 3 years later the brother is now 18 and his sister is home visiting from college and his dad comes over for a visit as well. For whatever reason they end up arguing and the dad blurts out that he never forgave her for the abortion she got when she was 19. Now if we just backtrack a second, the siblings slept together when the girl was 19, so 1 + 1 equals the baby was the brother's. Till this day he hasn't told anyone because he's really the only one who knows, and if he did tell anyone, I don't even want to think about what his family would say or everyone around him would say. Just don't tell anyone. Just keep it in. Don't even tell Reddit. At number 8 we have the landlord. So this confession was from an anonymous person who admitted he indirectly killed 7 people. As the landlord of this rental, he had put a rag into the water heater exhaust in order to keep the debris out, and he installed it into the new place. 7 people moved in, everything seemed to be going fine, but a week later the landlord got a call saying there'd been an accident and that he should come to the rental immediately. Dun dun dun. When he got there, there were police and emergency responders everywhere. A bunch of them started bombarding him, asking him where the gas shutoff was. So the landlord goes to shut the gas off and he realizes the new rag he had installed was sticking out at the top of the heater. He hadn't installed it properly, so he quickly ripped it out and turned the gas off before the police followed him downstairs, and he quickly just went upstairs and just acted nonchalant, acted like it didn't even happen. As he got up, he was told all 7 tenants had died and the police were very sorry. He never told the police what he had done, but he told the internet, and so here we are, carrying the burden of the 7-person murder with this guy. Great. Filling our number 7 slot is the brother. Now this one is definitely not a life-ruining confession per se, but it's still a really shitty one, so I was like, let's pop it in there. This one's from an anonymous redditor who told the internet she has a blind brother, and when they were young the user used to get annoyed and frustrated at all the extra attention her brother would get, and how the user had to be a lot more responsible at a young age because of her brother, of course. So to sort of get back at him, whenever they were alone, whether that was when they were playing or at the store or anywhere, she would actually abandon her brother someplace that was unfamiliar to him and would just stand to the side and watch her brother get super anxious trying to figure out what was happening and where he was. She even went further. When she used to help her brother with his homework, she would purposefully teach him the wrong answers just so she could be the smartest sibling. Petty, very petty. Years and years later she actually confessed all this to him, and he laughed it off, saying he understood and everything she's done now has completely overshadowed anything from their childhood. And they lived happily ever after. The end. Now at number 6 is the extortionist. So this anonymous guy confessed when he was 13 years old, he walked into his dad's room and caught him sleeping with his 15-year-old brother's girlfriend, who for the record was 15 as well. I'm sorry? I feel like that's very much a certain explicit website sort of, you know, made up scenario. But anyway, the guy never saw the girl again, and since then he started extorting his dad for money, and it's been about 6 years and he's still going. He made his dad buy him and his brother a car, some laptops, an Xbox, a PS3, you name it, he probably made his dad buy him it. The dad wasn't there much during their upbringing, so most people just assumed he was showering the kids with money to sort of make up for not being there. Great parenting. Either way, the kid is still doing it, and the dad is still probably scared of his other son ever finding out he slept with his very underage girlfriend. So unless he confesses and ruins his own life, he's just gonna be bled dry. financially. Coming in at number 5 is the cake business. Redditor I Got You This Cake runs a cake business, as you probably guessed. She charges customers hundreds and hundreds of dollars for her cakes, but her business is kind of a sham. She confessed that all her cakes are made from the $1 boxes at Walmart. She makes the decorations and fondant herself, and she's always wanted to learn how to bake an actual cake from scratch, but never actually did. She goes on to say she feels bad when people tell her how delicious her cakes are and how they're so much better than the box mixed cakes. Well, spoiler alert, they're the same thing. Either way, everyone thinks she spends hours and hours slaving over the oven baking her wonderful cakes when really it's just a bit of cake mix, oil and eggs. The user admits she's been doing this for years and her business is actually thriving, and if anyone found out, her reputation and business would be down the drain. I mean, that is sad, but I also feel like that's also like a sweet sort of karma too, I don't know. At number 4 is the sock. Now cast your mind to the PG-18 parts of your brain because that is where the story starts. Redditor user This Is Captain Meow confessed to us that around 10 years old or so he came into his sexual being and used to pleasure himself a lot. And can you tell where the title comes from now? Either way, he had a method of using a sock and then drying it, but of course you can't just leave it hanging in the bathroom or something because that would have just been really obvious. So he used to put it inside his gas heater until it dried and then put it back in the drawer like it never even happened. But one day his sock actually caught fire and blew up the whole unit and then set his entire house on fire. Fortunately, only his brother was home at the time and he survived unscathed, but the house was completely in ruins. For 5 whole years, him and his family moved from caravan park to caravan park, waiting for the confirmation that the fire wasn't caused by arson so they could finally receive their insurance payout. They eventually ended up getting the confirmation and started rebuilding the house, but the user never confessed to his parents that it was his fault their house burned down and that he was the reason they now live in a much smaller home where his giant backyard used to be. I shed tears for you. But also at 10 years old, you matured quickly. Filling our number 3 slot is the bunker. Now this one borderline made me laugh honestly, but an anonymous man confessed a few years ago he was in a really bad place financially. That's not funny, being broke is not funny. But he sold his house in order to keep his business going, but the one thing he failed to tell the new homeowners was that the property had an 800 square foot bunker that he had built. I don't know why exactly he built this bunker, but he did, and after selling the house, he actually moved into the secret bunker and has been living there ever since. The entrance is completely hidden, yet the man still comes and goes either very early or super late. I mean, is that illegal? He's obviously not paying rent to live in this bunker, so at least the cost is gone, but what about electricity? Are the homeowners paying for that? Have they not wondered why the bill is so high? I'm just very confused. Either way, I don't think the dude confessing this would ruin lives if he told people this, but he probably would go to jail for some odd reason or another. Now at number 2 is the parentage. So this mum's daughter turns 5 next week, which is all well and grand. I'm sure they're gonna have a lovely little birthday party for her, and if she knew her real parentage, I think she'd be crushed. The mother grew up in foster care, so she had never met her siblings or her parents, and in her last year of college, she met a guy, they fell in love, dated for a year, and she eventually got pregnant. Now one night they started talking about their upbringing, and he was telling her how he had been adopted when he was young. Either way, deeper into the conversation, the girl realized this guy she was seeing, the father of her soon-to-be daughter, was her half-brother. They had the same mum. They very quickly parted ways and he chose not to be in her daughter's life. The kid is completely fine, but the parents swore to never tell her the truth about who her dad is. If I was that kid and they told me that, I don't even know how I would be able to think about the bomb they just dropped on me. I can't even comprehend it now, and I'm not even this kid. Then finally, at number 1 is the almost shooting. So this anonymous person confessed he nearly did something horrendous. Haven't we all? Haven't we all? But first, some backstory. He was bullied a lot in high school, like think typical kid trying so hard to be cool but sadly just failing in every way. And in this situation, there were 4 jocks who used to rip on him more than anyone, and the last straw was when they beat him up in front of the girl he liked as she laughed and encouraged them. Brutal, very brutal. I know high school is this I know. After that day, he had enough and started thinking this just wasn't worth it. He was an only child, his parents worked constantly, so he had no support. He decided to take his dad's handgun and take it to school with him the next day. In his own words, I can't adequately describe to you guys how ready I was to end these four. I had absolutely no fear or doubt in my mind. I wanted nothing more than to show everyone what happens when you push someone over the edge like they did. I had the gun tucked in my waistline. He walked up to their table, but before he could shoot them, the gun fell out of his waistline and hit the ground, and at which point everyone started screaming and he was tackled to the ground. Teachers thought he had brought the gun to school to impress his peers, and he stuck to that story even though it wasn't true. He got expelled, obviously, and was sent to live on a youth ranch till he was 18. Now at 24, the man says he thinks about that incident all the time, and given the chance, he would do it right and shoot those four boys. Some scars just never really heal, do they?
Starting off this countdown, we have the nuns. In 2019, Pope Francis for the first time addressed the horrors that happened to nuns in the Catholic Church. Priests and bishops and other church officials have been taking advantage of nuns for ages. This was an ongoing problem for years, and the church wasn't doing anything about it. They were too busy focusing on covering up even bigger scandals and issues. Over the years, more and more nuns have come forward saying that they were victims. Some were afraid to speak up because they were dependent on the church and literally couldn't leave. Although Pope Francis acknowledged what happened, it's unclear the steps they are taking to prevent it in the future. In our 9th spot today, we have the Knights Templar. So Philip IV of France, as well as the Catholic Church, are directly responsible for torturing and executing innocent individuals back in the 14th century. Basically, Philip did not like the Templars in Spain and wanted to get rid of them. So he sent out his men to round them up, arrest them, and then imprison them. He then accused the innocent men of terrible crimes like sodomy, heresy, and renouncing Christ. Any of those crimes were punishable by the death penalty. Again, they were innocent, he just wanted to get rid of the Templar order. He then would torture the Templars so that they would confess. He would use a rack to stretch out their shoulders until they dislocated. Or he would have their private parts smashed. This was all done while the church knew that the men were innocent. In our 8th spot, we have Pope Pius XII. In this case, it's what the church didn't do. According to a recent discovery of archives, Pope Pius XII was fully aware what the Nazis were doing during the Holocaust and chose to remain silent. He knew of the mass executions of the Jewish individuals and he dismissed this all. In fact, he said that they were unable to confirm the crimes, so that's why he didn't speak up against them. It says a lot when they refused to publicly condemn the Nazis. In fact, apparently his silence was so that the Germans didn't come for them, so that the church could always be successful. They were just caring about themselves and not about the thousands of innocent individuals being killed. Moving on to number 7, we have the violent murders. Back in 1095, Pope Urban II gave rise to the Crusades during his reign as the head of the Catholic Church. He called all Christians in Europe to go to war against the Muslims. And it was not pretty. It literally said that they killed so many Muslims that the street ran with blood. And this was only the beginning. Waves of crusades continued until 1396, and although Catholics were not the only religion involved in mass violence, Pope Urban got it all started. And it was a violent time to say the least. Everyone was killed, no matter their age. Some people's heads were even put on sticks and then they would carry them around to scare others. Like, that is hella messed up. In our 6th spot today, we have William Tyndale. During the 16th century, William took it upon himself to translate the Bible into vernacular English so that more people were able to read it. But for some reason, the Catholic Church did not like him doing this, which is weird. Wouldn't they want the Bible translated so more people would become followers of it? Anyways, William actually had to go into hiding because the church was coming for him. They even burned copies of the Bible that were being smuggled around Europe. In the end, William was captured, tried for heresy, and then burned at the stake. He literally did nothing wrong. Want to know something even more messed up? Years later, the church was like, ah yes, let's translate the Bibles. They then turned to William's translations and used a whole lot of it, and then they never even apologized. Ridiculous. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Pope Alexander VI. So, Pope Alexander VI was said to be one of the worst popes in history. Why? Well, he is known for something known as the Banquet of Chestnuts. He basically invited 50 women over and told them to strip for him. Then he threw chestnuts on the floor and forced the women to get on their hands and knees and just surround their feet like animals. To make matters worse, he told the men that he invited that he would give the man who could get it on with the most women jewelry or fine clothes. So then they were all fighting over these women. This guy was hella corrupt and sick. Not only that, but he liked to watch horses get it on. That is disgusting. In our fourth spot today, we have the cover-ups. So a lot of shady stuff has gone down with the Catholic Church. There's no denying that. For years, the church knew all about the scandals surrounding the leaders of the church and how they would take advantage of innocent individuals, but they kept brushing this issue under the rug. Then in 2001, the Vatican told them that any cases should be reported directly to the Vatican hierarchy. Years later, they still weren't dealing with any of these cases. In 2004, instead of getting rid of the priests in question, they just moved them to different churches or different countries. So that didn't really stop them. They just had a new set of people that they could take advantage of. They literally cared more about their priests than the victims. Moving on to number 3, we have the grooming. Over the years, people of power at the church have groomed a number of young individuals. Today, I'm sharing the story of Michael. When he was young, he was groomed and forced into doing things he didn't want to do. One of the brothers of the church would bring him to Broadway shows and movies. This was all part of the grooming process. Then when he entered the congregation of Christian brothers, that's when he was abused and groomed by 4 or 5 different men. This is absolutely disgusting, and of course the church would do any and everything to make sure Michael's story or others didn't get out. In our second spot, we have the funding. CBC News and the Globe and Mail recently obtained files that expose the Catholic Church for spending some of the $79 million that it agreed to pay residential school survivors. That's right, they spent money that was meant to go to survivors of their residential schools. But instead, they took most of that money and put it into things like their Bible study group or for their personal lawyers and unapproved loans. Whereas other churches, including the Anglican, United, and Presbyterian Church, paid the full amount of compensation owed to the survivors without an issue. But the Catholic Church took the money and used it for themselves, which is disgusting since they played the biggest role in residential schools and the horrors that took place there. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the unmarked graves. Earlier this year, thousands of unmarked graves have been found by residential schools across Canada. Residential schools were funded by the federal government and run by the churches. They would tear families apart, taking the children and forcing them into these schools in order to assimilate them, and they were stripped of their native language and culture and traditions. While in the schools, they were treated terribly. They were neglected, tortured, and even murdered. In these unmarked graves, thousands of innocent young individuals were found. This went on for 120 years. Tens of thousands of Indigenous children were sent to these schools. Thousands never returned home. Currently, the grounds are being searched for unmarked graves at the Mohawk Institute, and soon more and more residential school grounds will be explored. And sadly, we all know more bones are going to be unearthed. It's a very sad and tragic reality.
Coming in at number 10, we have I'm Worried I'll Burn. This one was of course pulled from Reddit, and it follows a priest who isn't so happy about moving on to the other side. You think after a life of servitude to God, you would be ready to move on because you know that if anyone is going to get into heaven, it would be you. All of your priest buddies would be waiting for you there because what has a priest ever done wrong? But we don't know who this guy is. We can't assume that he's one of the worst people on the planet, and that's why he was worried about dying. This could have been because he was just a perfectionist. Maybe he was one of the best priests of all time, but just slipped up a couple of times due to human error, and because of his perfectionist attitude, he was worried that God wouldn't let him in. I mean, I don't know what the rules are about getting into heaven. It would seem that depending on who you pray to, it can be a lot easier. That's what I'm looking for in religion. I want a pretty lax policy on how you get into heaven, and you have to let me eat as much cheese as I want. Those are the only 2 things things that are really important to me. Coming at number 9, we have faith isn't everything. I mean, that's a pretty good message to send out to the world before you go on to the other side. Giving up your life to something can be a fulfilling thing to do no matter what the situation. It can give you purpose and something to chase, and in the end you might get really good at that thing, but you have to open up your life to other things. Apparently there was a priest on his deathbed and he wanted to get something off his chest. I guess after spending your whole life chasing one thing and then looking back on everything that you did, you might be a little regretful. Maybe this dude wanted to spend some more time with his family and friends, or there was a love that he let slip away because he was too caught up in the church. I don't know, dude. I have never been to church, so I don't know how much time it can take out of your life. It would seem like for some people it consumes their whole life. Coming in at number 8, we have a life without love is false. Sort of rolling off our last point with things that a priest could say to help bring more happiness into your life, we have a dude who said that life without love is false. Now, what does that mean exactly? Is he talking about a very specific kind of love, like getting married, or does he just mean having love for all the people around you to make sure that you are constantly spreading kindness? Well, the thing is with a lot of these last word statements is that we never really know what these people want or what message they were trying to send out, because before you know it, they're gone. And frankly, this one isn't scary if you look at it from the angle of someone who's trying to tell you to love one another with his last breath. But if you look at it from another angle, it might have been a sad old man who didn't have enough love in his life, and now he's warning the people around him not to make the same mistake. Coming in at number 7, we have simply pray. A priest was told by a doctor that he would most likely pass within a few days. As he was laying in his bed before the Grim Reaper came to give him a visit, he had many people come through who wanted to say goodbye. When they would ask him questions, or even when they would say how much they were going to miss him, he would always say the same thing: simply pray, which is a very peaceful thing to say before you move on. I feel like that would give people a lot of clarity as to what they need, because people would be coming to you in your final moments and they would want some sort of relief from their grief. But in reality, you don't have the power to give them that. That power is within them. So the only thing you can really do is tell them to pray and find peace with your final moments. Coming in at number 6, we have never make love. Now, these weren't the exact last words of this priest, but I don't think you can say what he actually said on YouTube, or else we would get demonetized. There was a priest who wanted to spread out to the world with his final breath, his last confession, the last thing that anyone would ever hear from him, that there was no time you should ever have carnal knowledge of another person. I mean, it seems a bit extreme if you ask me. I mean, even if you're the most religious person in the world, even if you're one of the most hardcore God lovers that has ever walked the earth, you know that you need to make hanky-panky sometimes, because if we didn't, there wouldn't be anyone left on the planet after a few generations. I think this dude might have been trying to finish his sentence, but he didn't have the strength. Maybe what he meant to say was never make love without taking a shower first. Even though I don't agree with that, sometimes you gotta flow with the moment, baby. Coming in at number 5, we have I took a life. Geez, this would be something where I wouldn't know how to act. It would be a very awkward moment, and I would probably just be doing that shifty eye thing when you're looking around like, oh, is everyone thinking what I'm thinking? I would just be looking around the room to see how everyone else would be taking in this information. I hope that I wouldn't be the only one who felt like he didn't know how to respond. But this came way of Reddit, of course, and the writer of this point said that apparently they were next to a priest right before he passed, and the man just started crying and saying that he caused someone to die. He didn't say how, he didn't say what happened, he just was sort of distraught and freaking out. People in the room were trying to calm him and ask him what happened, but before you know it, the man was gone from this plane of existence. And everyone in the room was just left there sitting and wondering if what he said was true, or if he was just having an episode before he passed on. Coming in at number 4, we have a secret life. This one stirred up a bit of a fuss in the comment section of this Reddit post. The responses were all over the place. Some people thought that this could have meant the priest secretly had a family that didn't know he was a man of God because they weren't supporters. Some people thought that this could have meant that he was secretly gay and didn't want his followers to know because he knew that they would disown him. I really have no idea what the final verdict on this was, but it might be the most mysterious one on this list. Coming in at number 3, we have I had an affair. I don't know what all the rules with being a priest are, but I'm pretty sure that you aren't allowed to get down and dirty with anyone. Now, I don't know if you have had intercourse with someone, if that means that you can never become a priest, or if it's once you have become a priest, you're not supposed to ever do the deed again. But either way, hearing from a priest in his last moments that he was out gallivanting with his thang out might shake your faith in religion a little bit. This one was pulled right from Reddit and said that a priest's last confession was that he did the thing more than once with more than one person since he had been a priest. Now, just for the record, I support that behavior because I don't think anyone should be forced to never juice it up. But I think if you're a person of God, this might rattle your cage a little bit, knowing that your priest might have gotten laid more than you. Coming in at number 2, we have I was a demon. Yeah, that's not the last thing you want to hear come out of the mouth of a priest. Imagine some dude who was in charge of giving you all your holy recommendations, like the dude who was in touch with God and really told you how to live your life. If you don't want to go to hell and you want to make it into heaven, you find out that this guy had been a demon the whole time. That is a very Scooby-Doo moment. That's like finding out the dude who tells you what Oscar movies to watch has actually only ever seen the Fast and the Furious movies. Mind you, those are great movies, but I wouldn't call them the most highbrow entertainment. But what would you do if the last thing a priest said was that he was a demon? Would you think that this was just his last brain fart? Like maybe he's gone mentally ill in his last moments and he was actually hallucinating? Would you think that he was telling you the truth, that someone from hell was able to get deep into the church? Would you think that this was all a prank? I mean, if you're going to die anyways, pulling off one final prank would be kind of funny. Or do you not believe in religion at all and you wouldn't really care? Let me know in the comments how that one made you feel. And coming in the number 1 spot, we have I stole from people. Now, this one is a little bit more concerning than the rest of the list because we have a little more information. Apparently, this priest's last confession was him talking about how the church he had worked for had been stealing from the people. Let me break it down for you so you know what he said. He said that the church he had worked for was taking money from his people to improve the church, but those improvements never came. The money was all being pocketed and never went to making the house of God a better establishment. Now, I don't think anything bad happens to you when you're a person of God who donates and then finds out that the people who have been taking the money are using it for something nefarious. But if you're the dude who's at the head of the church and you've been pulling something like this off the whole time, well, then things might not be looking that bright for you on the other side.
In our number 10 spot, we have the Vatican Library. The Vatican Library is a very secret library closed to the public. The only people that have access to it are popes and people that have gone through a lengthy screening process, and even then, they need to know exactly what they are wanting information on and will only be given info on what they ask for. This library is the top secret library with history and documentation since the beginning of time. The amount of dark gossip that is within those walls, I'm sure, is exponential. From the little that we know, the Vatican Library holds letters from world leaders throughout history detailing major events that us little guys will probably never be privy to. I'm sure they even have documentation on alien sightings. The church refuses to talk about what they have and know, and it's really just a shame. I'm a history lover myself, and truly that would be a magical experience to be able to explore this library. Well, if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to be recommended more content like this. In our number 9 spot, we have Operation Snow White. On June 20th, 1977, Michael Meisner, a Scientologist, contacted the FBI after allegedly being held captive for months. He revealed that he was a part of the biggest infiltration of the US government in history in something called Operation Snow White. On July 8th, 1977, 156 FBI agents entered a Scientology center in LA in the largest FBI raid in history. It was discovered that 5,000 Scientology agents infiltrated the IRS, the US Coast Guard Intelligence, DEA, etc. There were bugged offices, planted false information, stolen files, and so much more found. Apparently, the goal of this initiative was to remove any bad reports about Scientology. Some of the founders were sentenced to a few years in jail because of these crimes. They definitely want you to forget about this, but I'm sure they have done it again, and I'm sure other churches and organizations have done the same thing. We just haven't heard about it, and perhaps they haven't been caught. In our number 8 spot, we have exorcisms. This one shocked me. I knew that priests could do exorcisms, but I didn't realize that this is something that they do much. I truly thought that exorcisms were done more often in the movies to young girls doing the crab walk down the stairs. Yeesh, thinking of that scene gives me the shivers. Anyways, apparently the Vatican had a chief exorcist
exorcist named Father Gabriel Amorth, who had served over 60 years to the church and had performed over 160,000 exorcisms. Excuse me? Wow. How have there been that many people infiltrated by demons and this info isn't more widely talked about? Also, that is just this guy's number. Apparently popes and priests around the world perform exorcisms all the time. I'm shooketh. I could understand that the church wouldn't want to talk about this because it is a private, very sad thing to happen to a person, but man, that's a lot of people walking around feeling like they have demons within them. Pretty scary. In our number 7 spot, we have His Holiness. His Holiness was a book that was released to the public in 2012, which is based on the secret leaked papers about Pope Benedict. Apparently, the private documents were leaked by the Pope's butler. Yikes. Apparently, after an investigation, it was discovered that the individuals who were not from the Vatican were blackmailing gay bishops because they had broken their celibacy vows. The Pope went on to resign after these documents became public. Well, this is definitely a scandal, that's for sure. I remember people talking about this when it was happening, but I don't remember hearing the church comment on it. But I guess they sort of did through their actions, and I'm sure Pope Benedict was encouraged to resign. In our number 6 spot, we have the dead man on trial. This is a little piece of history that truly terrifies me and is such a testament to those times. In 897 AD, a literal dead man was put on trial. The man had been dead for 7 months. He had been dressed for the occasion by someone whom I'm sure was traumatized afterward. His name was Pope Formosus. He was being put on trial for acts that he had committed in his life. He had a lawyer and everything. He was found guilty and stripped of his former title as Pope, and everything he formerly did was declared void. His body was stripped of his clothes and put into rags before he was thrown into a river, the Tiber River in Italy, specifically because this river was where a lot of criminals' bodies were disposed of. Pretty gross. I wonder if there are any ghost haunting stories from this river. I bet you there are. In our number 5 spot, we have the Vatican Bank. The Vatican Bank has had its fair share of scandals over the years, and you best believe that the church will not be bringing any attention to it by speaking about it in any way. Allegedly, to start off the scandals, it is said that the Vatican Bank received a church tax from Germany's leader during World War II, if you catch my drift. Also, allegedly, a large amount of money was paid to the IOR so that the Western banks couldn't track the Vatican's spending. The details have never been released to the public, so Lord knows where they put their money. But why would you want to hide your money in the first place? Perhaps so that no one would know what you're up to if you're up to no good, but also possibly because someone might be a threat and that might be a reason to shield what you're doing. Either way, the secrecy is questionable. In our number 4 spot, we have mental illness in the church. When researching for this video, one of the things that shocked me was the amount of people that spoke about how the churches do not handle mental illness very well. You would assume that it would be approached with love and compassion and guidance to get help. But the common theme is that people have been told to just pray and it will make the illness go away. Some believe that this thought process stems from the very old thinking that mental illness stems from demons being in one's body, and so people are being told to pray them away because that's what was always done if someone needed, an exorcism or to get rid of an attached spirit. The biggest problem is that issues go untalked about. The people bottle it up inside, and when prayer doesn't work, the person dealing with the mental illness feels like a failure or like they don't have enough faith. Hopefully this is something that churches of all religions work on improving, as this is just unacceptable at this point in time. In our number 3 spot, we have shame. Within many religions, there has been the problem of spiritual criticism, which has led to emotional harm within the church communities. I'm not talking about outsiders passing judgment, I'm talking about religious community members passing judgments on each other. This bad behavior is committed under the banner of spirituality. From practices of shaming members if they don't fulfill religious expectations, to bad-mouthing members who have left, making people want to stay out of fear. Scientologists have been accused of doing that to members
members that have tried to leave, but also other churches have been accused of this as well. It's super unfortunate to hear that in communities that have, the core purpose of being loving, they are people that are shaming each other. Talk about not practicing what you preach. In our number 2 spot, we have misusing their power. In recent years, it has become public knowledge that the French clergy took advantage of more than 200,000 individuals since the 1950s, mainly males. The Catholic Church has been accused of turning a blind eye to this happening, and many have been outraged that this went on for so long without someone stepping in. Allegedly, it wasn't until the 2000s that some progress was made. Before that, the church showed complete indifference to the victims. Through a series of investigations, 2,700 victims gave testimonies about what happened to them, and thousands were identified through archives. A wide range study showed that there could be up to 330,000 victims. In recent years, about 2,900 to 3,200 priests have become suspects to these crimes. Wow. Truly despicable. I hope that there is some kind of justice for these victims. In our number 1 spot, we have the Salem witch trials. Most people believe that the witch trials were a result of many things: bad weather, a poor government, and paranoid leaders. But what a lot of people may not be aware of is the idea that the Catholic and Protestant churches possibly used the trials to compete with each other for followers. Pretty dark. History.com reported that economists Peter Leeson and Jacob Russ believe that, quote, the two churches advertised their finesse at persecuting witches as proof that they were the best church to join if you wanted protection from Satan. Witches, after all, were doing the bidding of Satan, so getting rid of them was a way to protect people from them. Wow. Well, that will definitely persuade 1 or 2 people, that's for sure. It has also been noted that the Catholic Church did not fear or acknowledge witches in history until the Protestant Church became a competitor threat.
So starting us off at number 10, we have Father Amorth. One day, a woman named Rosa came to visit Father Amorth. She was in her late 30s and was struggling as she believed she was possessed. Father Amorth had completed countless successful exorcisms by this point in his career, and so he was more than happy to help her. Father Amorth believed her affliction stemmed from a curse brought on by her brother's girlfriend, who was a practicing witch and a member of a powerful demonic cult. But during their last session together, things started out as they normally do. Rosa sat down beside the priest before closing her eyes and waiting for the ritual to begin. But all of a sudden, she began to throb. Her whole body was in a terrifying trance, and Father Amorth placed his hand over his heart, starting to feel worried. Suddenly, the thrashing was intensifying and becoming more violent. Even the strength of 5 men could barely hold down the petite woman. Rosa began foaming at the mouth, and her facial features started to become distorted. She continued writhing, seemingly trying to escape the grasp of the men holding her down, and Father knew that some terrifying demon was haunting this woman. Then, without warning, Rosa began shouting in Latin, a language she did not know. "Never!" she screamed into his face in a deep guttural voice. "Don't touch her!" She continued to shout with her demonic voice, still foaming at the mouth like a rabid animal. Father Amorth yelled back to surrender, but the woman turned to him with a sly, haunting grin and screamed, "I am Satan," right in his face. Now, eventually he was able to free the woman of the demon, but he would never forget the day he was eye to eye with Satan himself.
Number 9. Father Jude Bullock, a priest who doesn't believe in God. That doesn't really make sense. A Catholic priest is being investigated by church authorities after complaints from angry churchgoers that he does not believe in God, heaven, or hell. Father Jude Bullock from North London has been ordered to explain his views to the Archbishop of Westminster and the leader of the Catholic Church in England and Wales. The radical clerk, who refuses to wear a dog collar, preaches at St. John the Evangelist Church. He has upset so many churchgoers that some of them have boycotted his masses. He is the first Catholic priest to be publicly identified with the Sea of Faith group set up to promote the idea of religion as a human creation. Father Bullock says that there's no God out there. there. His confusing explanations range from God is nothing and God is everything to God is being in itself. He says his prayers are more like meditation and that he has dumped the idea of the soul and questions the concept of the virgin birth. He's defended his controversial views, but I think everyone, myself included, wonders how you can be a priest and not believe in God. Like, he could get any other job. I just don't understand.
Next up at number 8 is Reverend Louis Gigante. It comes as no surprise that the Catholic Church has some very strict rules for members of the clergy. Now, besides the obvious things like don't kill, at the top of the list is probably their vow of celibacy followed by the vow of poverty, which is why it was such a huge deal after Reverend Louis Gigante's death when he revealed he had a 32-year-old son and a fortune of $7 million. Gigante was a well-respected priest in the Bronx from the 60s until 2002, who fought a lot of his career for equitable tenant rights and low-income housing. But as it turns out, he had some secrets in the closet. Gigante's brother was the convicted boss of a large mafia family, and many suspected the Reverend might have had his hand in the ring the whole time. During his brother's trial, a member of the mafia came forward stating that Gigante wasn't just the brother of a member. Oh no. He himself was a part of the family, but it was later recanted and Gigante never confirmed or denied the claims. Still, it became clear that there was a high chance that all of his funding had come from mafia money, no matter his personal involvement. But even more shocking to the Catholic Church than the potential involvement in one of the largest American mafia families was his adult son that he had largely hid from the public eye so that he wouldn't be forced to step down from his priesthood. His son Gino said that while a close inner circle knew about him, that it wasn't public knowledge and was only confessed after his death in 2021.
Number 7. Father Gregory Gritton. The canon law of the Catholic Church requires that clerks observe perfect and perpetual continence for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. For this reason, priests make vows of celibacy at their ordination, thereby agreeing to remain unmarried and abstinent throughout their lives. The 1961 document entitled Careful Selection and Training of Candidates for the States of Perfection and Sacred Orders state that homosexual men should not be ordained. In 2005, the Church clarified that men with deeply rooted homosexual tendencies cannot be ordained. The Vatican followed up in 2008 with a directive to implement psychological screening for candidates for the priesthood. Conditions listed for exclusion from the priesthood include uncertain sexual identity and deep-seated homosexual tendencies. This lesson was engraved into Father Gritton when he was in cemetery school, and at 24 he climbed up to his cemetery dorm window and dangled one leg over the edge and said, "I really am gay." Father Gritton, now a priest near Milwaukee, remembered telling himself that for the first time and that it was like a death sentence. Fewer than about 10 priests in the United States have dared to come out publicly, but gay men probably make up at least 30 to 40% of the American Catholic clergy, according to dozens of estimates from gay priests and researchers. Some priests say the number is closer to 75%. When discussing this, Father Gritton said, "It never really was my shame. It was the church's shame. They're the ones who should have shame for what they have done to myself and many other LGBT people. All I can say is, preach."
Coming in at number 6 is Father Daniel Pietra Corgianu. I probably butchered that, I'm sorry. But the name of the patient was Irina Cornici, and she had had a hard life. Her father had taken his life when she was young, and then her mother abandoned her at an orphanage where she was abused by the staff her entire life. As an adult, she had a friend who joined a monastery, and she decided that life as a nun would be her saving grace. But after a few months, she began acting strange, and although officially diagnosed with schizophrenia, the priest and many others believed the true issue was demonic possession. Sister Cornici was bound at her ankles and wrists before being locked in her room without food for several days. Next, they chained her to a cross and carried her into the church to anoint her. Her wrists and forehead were anointed with holy oil, and she was gagged with a towel to stop her from screaming as they tried to cast the devil out of her body for the next 3 days. After she was believed to have been freed, they untied find the sister, but suddenly she fainted. They called an ambulance as they couldn't find a pulse, but tragically on the way to the hospital, she died. The priest and 5 involved nuns were charged with her killing, and Father Corgianu was sentenced to 14 years in prison. To this day, he maintains he did not kill the woman, and shockingly, he could actually be right. Although initially, it was said she died of dehydration and starvation, one of the coroners on the team came forward years later saying that it was concluded she actually died from an adrenaline overdose administered by paramedics, and that he had no clue why this wasn't taken into account during trial. So maybe Father was telling the truth this whole time.
Number 5. Sister Josefa Menendez. Yes, she's not a priest, but this story needs to be told. This young Spanish sister, who had a short religious life of great suffering, experienced revelations throughout much her life. More than once, she was taken to hell to witness and feel the suffering firsthand. Sister Josefa was reluctant to write on the subject of hell, and did so only to conform to her Lord's wishes. She wrote about her experiences in her journal. She described hell as the greatest torment due to the soul's inability to love. She wrote, "One of these damned souls cried out, 'This is my torture that I want to love and cannot. There is nothing left in me but hatred and despair. If one of us could so much as make a single act of love, but we cannot, we live on hatred." As mentioned, she went to hell multiple times, but one time she saw the devil. She wrote, "Souls were crying out, and the devil answered, 'Insinuate yourselves by inducing carelessness in them, but keep in the background so that you are not found out. Tempt these others into ambition, to self-interest, to acquiring wealth without working, whether it be lawful or not." That entry was from February 1923. She visited hell many times after that, but didn't report on seeing the devil ever again.
Coming in at number 4 is Father Gerald Robinson. In the year 1980, Father Robinson was the priest for the chapel at Toledo Mercy Hospital. But when one of the chapel's oldest nuns was found brutally killed, Father Robinson became the lead suspect for the crime. Sister Margaret Paul was found with 31 strangely shaped stab wounds all over her body, some of which formed an upside-down cross over her heart, and with a smear of blood across her forehead, symbolizing a mockery of her last rites. When Father Robinson was initially brought in for questioning, his Monsignor interrupted the police interview and escorted him out to leave. There were no other suspects, and the horrifying case went cold for 23 years. But then, in 2003, investigators were sent an anonymous letter from a woman who called herself Survivor Doe. It outlined the corruption she'd experienced under Father Robinson. She said that he, as well as other nuns, routinely abused her during satanic rituals, and that often these rituals involved human sacrifice. She believed Sister Paul was one of these sacrifices. With these new allegations, authorities reopened the case, and with new DA technologies available, they were able to prove the weapon in the nearly 3-decade-old cold case was Father Robinson's letter opener, and convicted him for the crime in 2006.
Number 3. Unnamed priest. In the Catholic Church, the seal of confession is the absolute duty of priests or anyone who happens to hear confession to not disclose anything that they learn. But this story was posted online. My grandmother's brother was a Catholic priest, and for the most part he followed his oath to the letter. However, there was a situation where his humanity changed that respect. There was a guy who had confessed to multiple killings and to other people who were still missing. The person who confessed to these crimes was a regular at the church, and my uncle was very torn up about this. He never said anything about the confession with the other priests, but he told me that he prayed about it, and he felt that God wanted him to make sure that the other people would be safe. My uncle had a friend he went to school with on the police force, and he privately told his friend of this confession, and his friend kept where he got this information from and started a personal investigation. As it turned out, the man was arrested and convicted. This was the only time my uncle said he went against his oath and the church, and all the way up to his death, he never regretted what he did because he believed there are circumstances when a priest should not be bound to his oath. I have to agree to this. If you kill someone or cause serious harm to them and confess it, I feel like that should be reported to protect others.
Coming in at number 2 is Hans Schmidt. Born in Germany in 1881, Schmidt knew early on that he wanted to be a priest, but he was also sort of a weird kid with a dark appetite for blood and gore, routinely caught killing animals and drinking their blood. Spoiler alert, these two passions would collide in a very bad way. By age 25, he was ordained, but after only 4 years serving in Germany, he got into some hot water with higher ups and was forced to relocate to Louisiana. Soon after, he was butting heads with the leaders, and so he moved to Manhattan and began working at St. Boniface Church. It was here that he met the woman who changed everything, Anna Mueller. She was the church's newly hired housekeeper, and shortly after Schmidt's arrival, the two began an affair. After Schmidt says God told him to love her. Schmidt was once again transferred to a different church in Harlem, potentially due to someone learning of the affair, but despite this, he continued his secret relationship with Anna, and the two even had a secret wedding where Schmidt vowed to leave the priesthood for her. But soon after, Anna fell pregnant, and Schmidt knew that everything could be taken from him if word got out he had broken his vow of celibacy. Then, as he tells it, in the midst of an intimate affair with Anna, Schmidt heard God demand he sacrifice her. So one night while she was sleeping, he slit her throat and dismembered her body before taking advantage of the corpse and throwing it into the Hudson River. Then, after he killed her, he went to mass as if nothing had happened. He was eventually tried and sentenced to death, where at first he tried to claim insanity before admitting to everything. To date, he is the first and only priest executed in the United States.
Number 1. Father Jose Manioga. He is a priest of St. Augustine, Florida, and he says he died in a traffic accident in 1985 where he was taken by his guardian angel to visit heaven, hell, and purgatory, and came back to life to continue his ministry as a priest. He was struck head-on by a drunk driver, and he met his guardian angel upon death, a figure that was bright, beautiful, and radiant. His angel told him he was going to meet God, but he first wanted to show him hell and purgatory. Hell, he said, was a sea of unquenchable fire with demon-like monsters, lost souls that were dirty, filthy, and ugly. Numbered among the souls were priests and bishops who were not faithful to their calling as shepherds. He also noted a great deal of hatred and infighting that occurred between the eternally condemned. In purgatory, he had the opportunity to speak to the suffering souls. They were all sad, stained, and anxious to go to heaven, and they begged for his prayers. He said heaven shined like the sun and included millions of souls praising God. He met Christ, the Blessed Mother, and Saint Joseph. He said, "Our Lord told me that my second life he had a great mission for me, that I would come back to life and I would work in a foreign land."